Hi students, I wanted to provide you with some assistance with your homework and also to show you a few things about the homework environment in McGraw-Hill. First thing you probably noticed when starting this is that you're given 3 attempts, and with each attempt on the homework you start over at the beginning, so keep that in mind. The other thing that you might have noticed is up here in the upper right hand corner is a box that says check my work. This will allow you to determine before you submit it whether it's correct or not. And as I had discussed with another student in the class, the homework is intended to help you. It's intended to help you learn it, to practice it, and to apply it, the concepts rather. And so it's an important thing to use these options to make sure that you are learning it properly. So checking your work is unlimited. You can do it as many times as you want, but hopefully it is a tool that helps you to make sure you're understanding what you're doing as you go. So these problems, I'm going to hit just a few of them to kind of show you how to set it up and show you how these connect with the information that you're provided with in this chapter. This first one is about Maria Luisa's demand schedule. So that's the individual demand schedule. And the demand schedule for the individual has the same relationship as demand for a market. So for Maria Luisa, there's that inverse relationship between price and quantity. And so when it comes to demand, so this is her demand for web tutoring given certain prices and how many hours, the quantity rather, she would demand. So here they acknowledge that she's got 2 different conditions. First one is before the lottery win, and then they show you that after there's an increase in income, which is that lottery win, she has a different level of quantity demanded. And so that goes back to the basic concept in the chapter, and I really encourage you to make sure you know this, and that is that what will shift that demand curve, not just for the individual but for the entire market, is an increase in income. So you can see it here numerically and answer this, I think, pretty easily. So without a lottery win, and that's going to be right here in this initial quantity demanded, she would buy 14 hours of web tutoring, you can find it right here, and she'd be willing to pay $10 an hour for those 14 hours. Now, with the increase in income that comes from the lottery win, suddenly her quantity demanded at for 14 hours, she'd be willing to pay more, let me say it that way. And so those 14 hours, she'd be willing to pay $20 an hour. So that just shows you how that shift in conditions, underlying market conditions, such as income, changes the quantity demanded. And if we extrapolate that to the entire market, what we would see is that for that increase in income, every price that that particular good or service is offered at would have greater quantity demanded. And that results in a shift rightward of the curve. This next one asks you to do another analysis of an individual and looking at her supply, individual supply curve, can be connected to the market supply curve because the rules that govern it, in this case that law of supply, are the same. So you have the numbers here, and it asks you to say after Anne drops out of the market and stops tutoring, what's going to change in terms of the overall market supply. So we've got the price per hour, and then we've got Anne, Bob, Carlos. We add that up, we aggregate it to get the market supply, and now if Anne were to drop out, we just subtract, right? So the 94 from 158, and then the market demanded, or quantity demanded I should say, is unchanged. And so we do the same thing with each one. We deduct Anne's contribution to the overall market, and we'd get the new quantity supplied. And that's the equivalent of the underlying market condition of fewer suppliers in the marketplace. So if you're trying to connect this to what you see in the overall learning in the chapter, one of the determinants of that supply curve is the number of suppliers. So in this case, we're changing the number of suppliers by removing Anne's contribution. She's dropping out of it. So you've got that. And then the equilibrium price is where the new quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demanded. So hopefully that's pretty manageable. This next one is the same idea. This is if Anita drops out, and you can do that the same way, and it's good practice, even though it's a bit repetitive. And of course, what you see will be different than what I'm showing you right now, because this runs on an algorithm. So it's never a guarantee that you're going to see the same thing, but it might help to see how it's done. In this case, you're just answering some questions from the information given and the initial price of the ticket and assessing the amount of surplus or shortage in the market. Hopefully that's comfortable for you. In this case, equilibrium price is going to be where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded overall. So you're going to gather some information here and you're going to do your totals, right? So you're going to add up the individual contributions of Al, Betsy, Casey, Daisy, Eddie, and you're going to get your quantities at each price. That gives you, if we were graphing this, a demand curve, and then this would aggregate and give you the supply curve information. From here, you're going to find the point where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded, and then they're going to give you a price of $4, and you can just analyze if there's a difference at $4 of quantity supplied and quantity demanded. So if there's a shortage, there's going to be more demanded than supplied, and if there's a surplus, there's going to be more supplied than demanded. So you can work through that. This is a similar problem, and again, I know it's repetitive, but it's good practice. And the goal here is to really get comfortable with this, because supply and demand is such a fundamental understanding in economics. It really informs everything else we're going to do in this class. For 7, another evaluation of the market in a particular good. And this is changing. The marketplace changes because of changes in outside conditions. So what you saw in the work for the chapter, the reading and the videos, is that you've got a change in price that only changes the quantity demanded because of the relationship between the two, and or supplied, by the way. Change in price only changes quantity, whether it's demand or supply. And in this case, we're talking about a change in the marketplace other than a change in price. So in this case, it's a hurricane, and it changes demand, and it's not a change in price, although it leads to a change in price. We're talking about the underlying market conditions changing. And so this is the effects of a hurricane, which is pretty timely considering what's going on. Another one, and again, I know you might start to say, well, this is repetitive, but if you get good at this, then you'll see that you're developing a skill of understanding how demand and supply change in markets to lead to new market conditions, and they change price and quantity. And you will get a few practice with the graphing part of it. So this is one that I really like a lot. And if I know you're doing this and you're only identifying the change, but I would just encourage you, in the interest of really understanding this material, to go ahead and draw these changes and see if you can see them graphically. I think it will help with your understanding. So let me show you what I mean. We can draw each one of these situations and help illustrate it, and I think it will help confirm that understanding of how this works in your mind a little bit. So let's see if I can pick a different color. And we'll start by looking at this first one. So for each of these events, we're looking at its effect on the domestic car market. In the first case, the U.S. economy falls into a recession. So if we want to see that graphically, we would just draw a picture of the market to start with. And this is the market in its equilibrium condition. And so our equilibrium price is going to, yeah, it does that. All right. The equilibrium price is going to be here, and I just like to identify it as price equilibrium. Here's quantity at equilibrium. And what happens here is if the recession hits, then what it affects demand, the demand side, by affecting consumers, their willingness and ability to purchase. So at every price it's offered at, this is not a price change, this is a change in the underlying market conditions. In this case, that's going to shift that demand curve to the left. I just label that D2. It's a little messy there, but I think you get the idea. And what I can see is from that shift, and of course the answer here is, the simple answer is demand decreases, right? But what I want you to see is what it means in the marketplace. So let's go back. And we've got the new price, and I know it's a little hard to see because my drawing isn't perfect, but hopefully you see the idea here that the new price is lower than the original equilibrium price, and the new quantity is lower than the original equilibrium quantity. So that change in demand changes price and quantity. However, a change in price would only shift quantity. So that's a little bit of a tricky thing. I know there's a video posted about the difference between those two concepts, and I would encourage you to review that and practice this. Practice is the key. The next one, U.S. auto workers go on strike. And again, we're talking about a change in the market for domestic automobiles. So if we start with a picture of the market, identify what that change looks like. We've got the auto workers are part of the inputs, so that's contribution to supply. So let's start with our original supply. I just like to label them 1 and 2. And what we could say is, well, that's going to cause supply to decrease. Notice that's not a change in price. And so that's going to be a change in availability of inputs, one of the shifters of that supply curve. And so, let's go back. It keeps doing that to me. If I double click it, it likes to zoom. So here's my new price versus my original price. Let me see if I can make that a little more clear. This is not easy to draw with this program. And there's my original equilibrium price. So you can see the difference here. So after that shift in the marketplace, we started here. This is equilibrium. And then we had that shift that took place because an underlying condition in the marketplace changed, and that was the cost or availability of resources to the producers. So there's, and I got those backwards. I'm sure you just saw that, but it's very difficult to draw. But hopefully you're practicing this. I would have some paper nearby and just make sure that you have this ability to recognize these shifts. Because like I said earlier, it's going to be fundamental to understanding what comes afterwards. We're going to use graphs like this to understand lots and lots of different concepts, both micro and macroeconomic. So that supply decreases is your answer here, and you can continue on with these. But again, I would encourage the decision to go ahead and practice that as you go. All right, go on to the next one. The next one is similar, and this is looking for changes in the market for massage therapy. And you're going to start with the same idea, the picture of the market at equilibrium. You're going to introduce the change that they give you here. That's an underlying change in the marketplace, which is going to cause either demand or supply to shift. And if you get confused with that, go back and go to the book, go to the videos, and make sure you know what the shifters are. There are 6 things that will shift that demand curve that are not price changes but are underlying market conditions. There are 6 things that will shift that supply curve. And so you're going to want to make sure you know those and comfortable with them, and I encourage the graphing. It just helps you know with this better. Now this one is a graphing problem where you're going to use the tools in McGraw-Hill Connect to graph, and you're going to put in the information, price and quantity at each one. So you're going to start with your demand side. Well, you can start with your supply side if you want, but you're going to put in the data and graph the demand side, then the supply side, and you should be able to see graphically where they come together to provide equilibrium price. And that's, I think, pretty basic stuff, but good practice. Again, same thing. You're going to use the drawing tools provided to go in and graph that information, price and quantity. It's just like ordered pairs. 8 and 2, 7 and 3, 6 and 4. You'll put it on the graph. You'll see where those two things come together, those two forces in the marketplace, and you'll find your equilibrium price. This is similar to the other one, except that this is asking you to recognize these shifts graphically, like I was encouraging you to do before. So, as always, I would say shift them, grab some paper and pencil, good old school way to do it, and just shift those curves, right for an increase, left for a decrease. And it does not matter if it's demand or supply. That's always how the shifts go, right and left. So watch out for that. I know your eyes sometimes want to tell you that it's up and down, and you might look at this horizontal price axis, or excuse me, vertical price axis for your guidance, but where you want to have your eyes trained is on the horizontal, the quantity axis. A movement to the right is a movement this way for either the demand or the supply curve. A movement to the left is this way. It's either demand or supply, same thing. It's a decrease if it moves to the left. And I know that sounds basic and you think, okay, I've got it, but I promise you that practice will help you with that. You will just understand it better and you'll see it. And this is the same thing. This is asking you to shift those curves to the right or to the left, and then to answer some questions about what's going on here. So in this case, how many organs are supplied at a zero price? Well, you're just reading the graph. If you go to 0 as your price, and you go to how many organs are provided, you'll see that on the supply curve, it's 0, right? So that might seem kind of obvious to you, but maybe it's harder to see it on the graph, but it's 0. And then you can start to see how there are differences in different price levels. There are different levels of quantity supplied and quantity demanded, and those create your surplus and your shortage conditions. And if you get confused on that, again, I would draw a picture. It says, we're saving this question. Okay, got it. All right, so that's the practice. If you have more specific questions, I would encourage you to give it a try, check your work, and see what you can do. But I would not treat this chapter as one to get through. I would make sure that you're very comfortable with the material in this chapter. Practice it. If you want to do extra versions of the homework, no harm, no foul, because it takes your highest score from your 3 attempts. So if you go through it once and you get a perfect score, take the time and go through it again. It might not be a bad idea to just practice it with no risk involved. All right, so good luck with this. So long.